part of the week for me that was actually quite chaotic and, from a journalist point of view, quite good fun to cover, was the Brexit Party's wrangling, infighting, implosion when 4 of its MEPs quit quite dramatically. We got this press call, come over to 1 Great George Street in 2 hours, this big announcement, and basically Annunziata Rees-Mogg, Jacob Rees-Mogg's sister, John Longworth, prominent businessman, and 2 other MEPs decided to quit the party.
Jacob Rees-Mogg's sister is quitting the party in order to support the
Conservatives.
Conservatives.
Support the Conservatives, so make of that what you will.
Very strange. I wonder what's going on there.
So we had this strange... We arrived and the Brexit Party's press officer was there doing his own sub-briefing, which delayed the actual press conference where they were announcing that they were quitting. And it was all very chaotic, quite a bun fight. We had one of the MEPs who was quitting was in tears. It was all very emotional. And just, in this very staid campaign, it was quite an interesting point in the week where actually, there's one party that isn't quite as disciplined as the others, and that's the Brexit Party.
It is a bit strange that certainly I've noticed that this seems to be one of the first elections, because we've had quite a few recently, that Nigel Farage seems a little bit insignificant at the moment. There was a lot of significance to start with, was the Brexit Party going to stand against the Conservatives. But since he's done his U-turn from hating Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement to somehow accepting it and not standing against the Conservatives, it seems sort of almost like a spent force. He's not standing, therefore there isn't a sort of, will he win his seat? Will he not win the seat? I don't think anyone's even considering the Brexit Party winning a seat to come into Parliament. May, of course, happen. Anything can happen on Thursday. But it feels that Nigel Farage is sort of somehow irrelevant in this conversation now.
Well, I think that's a fair point. I think it's it's partly his own fault. So I'm not going to... Hardly Nigel Farage's greatest fan, but one of the things he always had going for him is he knew where he stood, and he stood up, and he was prepared to say what he believed in. This sudden turn to saying, let's all support the Conservative Party now, I think really did him damage personally. And you can see the anger it provoked amongst Brexit Party supporters and some of their candidates and this sort of thing. I mean, they are still, obviously the Brexit Party themselves are busy talking up their chances in a couple of places, places in the northeast, there's a couple in Yorkshire, that sort of thing. But it does feel like very much a sort of spent force, and that exactly as Sam said, that like you saw in 2017, this is an election where the 2 main parties are lined up and people are making a choice on that kind of basis. Perhaps this time with a bit more tactical voting, perhaps with a bit more of a Lib Dem vote in some places. Obviously a different dynamic in Scotland with the SNP there, but that seems to be what's happening, and the smaller parties getting really decisively squeezed.
A huge array of people with less than £100 in the bank, literally living on the gig economy, making ends meet with pence to spare at the end of the month. Have the Conservatives put enough forward to say, look, vote for us and we'll solve these problems? We have the answers for you.
Well, I think obviously Boris Johnson has been Prime Minister since July, and so over that time he has actually already started the process of making changes. So we've seen Sajid Javid announce plans for a living wage of £10.50. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was pre the election. And obviously during the election, he's announced plans for extra nurses, more police. There's been an actual acknowledgement that austerity has... It's done its job and now it's time to move on. And I think so. Actually, this weekend he's given an interview to the Daily Mail where he talked about how he is perhaps more like Michael Heseltine than Margaret Thatcher, in that he believes in investing in infrastructure to revitalise the country. So I think there is a definite shift away from the Cameron era to investing in public services and in infrastructure and trying to make people's living standards higher.
Well, that didn't work for the last 9 years. I mean, Boris Johnson can't walk away from the record of the Conservatives, of which he was a senior member, right?
Okay, is there a room for... Because Boris Johnson has spoken about this plenty of times, when he is confronted with the record of the last 9 years of the Conservative government. Is it acceptable, in your view, James, that he says, well, look, I've only been in power since July.
Absolutely not. At what point did he, in those 9 years, as Mayor of London or as a senior Conservative MP or as somebody with a newspaper column and all the other forums that he's had, at what point did he pop up and say, actually, austerity is a bad idea? This is 130,000 people whose deaths are associated with austerity now. 120,000, thank you. At what point did he say any of this during those 9 years? He had plenty of time to do it. There were plenty of people saying austerity is a bad idea. There is a consensus amongst economists by this point, from the International Monetary Fund to the OECD, to any economist you care to mention, bar a fringe, that austerity just didn't work. It didn't work in economic terms. We don't have an economy that works in the way that it should be doing. Real wages today, for most people, average real wages are lower now than they were in 2008. You can see the homelessness outside. So it's absolute nonsense for Boris Johnson to turn around and say, oh, well, I've only been Prime Minister for a little bit, never mind me. And actually, what was he saying? That clip of him telling everyone, boasting that there was nobody who did more to defend the bankers than himself as a politician. That's what Boris Johnson stood for. And so then to try and realise that this is now really quite seriously unpopular because people look at the country and see the mess that it's in after 9 years and say, oh, I'm just going to walk away from it. Well, he's trying his best, but that's why there's a real fight in this election, because I don't think everybody's buying it. That's why there's a real fight over the next few days.
It's unquestionable that Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party have had a lot of success with their slogan of "Get Brexit Done." And the truth is, a Labour government would deliver another referendum and possibly a Scottish referendum on top of that. So are you worried that you are essentially promoting and accentuating this sort of voter fatigue? People have had enough after 3 years. They want this over and done with. They want to move on with their lives.
Well, I'm tired of this strapline, "Get Brexit Done." My strapline is rewiring Britain, which is investment in our physical, digital and social infrastructure. With regard to the matter of the referendum, this is the most important issue that we will face in our lifetimes. It has implications for our children and our grandchildren as well. And personally, and it's also the Labour Party position, I believe that we owe it to the British people to present this choice to them again, now that we know far more than we did in June 2016, so that we can make a once and for all decision. This isn't like a general election where we can reverse the decision in 4 or 5 years' time. This is absolutely it.
Can I just say thank you as an interviewer? It was wonderful to interview a Conservative Party candidate without getting the phrase "Get Brexit Done" anywhere in your interview. So may I thank you for that, and happy Christmas.
Can I just add to that? Because I think when in reflection, when we look back at this, the whole aspect of the interview, of holding people like myself and indeed the leaders to account, will come under scrutiny again. And there are no rules in the digital framework of democracy. They've not been written yet. We're still trying to work out what the actual balance is. The Andrew Marr interview I thought was quite undignified. I thought the Friday night one was actually very, very good. I think because of the way democracy is advancing, the pace of change of information and so forth, lots of questions to be asked. Important that we're held to account as well. But it has been a very different election, apart from the winter election. You touched on it before. But it has been a very different election. I think there's lots of questions to be asked to improve it. We are an exemplar, I think, around the world as to how democracy moves forward. But I think it has been an interesting election, much to learn in the aftermath of the 12th of December.
Now, these governments only last for 5 years. They all seem to want to commit to tree planting by other governments in the future. But the agricultural land, has Labour done any sort of survey on the agricultural land? There's different grades. You can't plant trees on hillsides because the soil's too thin. Have they done anything? Because I think all these tree pledges have appeared since the Extinction Rebellion has come about. I can't remember tree pledges from 2 years ago.
Okay, Harry, thank you for your question. I'm going to put it to Will, who's typed furiously away. It's 2 billion trees from Labour. I think a lot of people have gone out and done sort of maths and gone, oh, that means everybody has... It's important to say there is a story from Ethiopia that managed to plant 350 million trees in a day. So the actual physicality of planting the trees is possible, but Harry raises a good point there. All these pledges that are going to be done over a series of years, extending beyond the 5-year government period, and with the rule that we have that one government can't bind the hands of another, how do these things work?
Well, I mean, do you want your government to just say we're just going to do 5 years of stuff and then myopically stop, or do you want them to have a longer term ambition for the country? I think whether it's for long-term future of the NHS or how we're going to pay for care for elderly people or how we're going to tackle climate change, lots of these things can't be done in 5 years. Completely reasonable for them to say what they will do in the longer run if they stay in government forever, as long as they're clear what they're actually going to do in the next 5 years about it. So let's talk about tree planting, because I completely agree. I was bewildered by the number of parties that suddenly got their kind of gardener's world hat on and decided that pledging to plant however many trees was the new focus of the general election. So we learned a bit about tree planting. As you say, Labour want to plant 2 billion new trees by 2040. Yeah. It's unlikely they'll be in government that entire time, but who knows? It's in the hands of the voters. This is equivalent to about 300,000 trees a day. So possible. The BBC once led an initiative which planted an estimated 230,000 trees in an hour in 2009, mainly using volunteers. In Turkey, there was a program which planted 300,000 trees in an hour in 2019. So it is physically possible to plant that many trees. Whether or not there's enough space, curious thing, about, somewhere between 88% and 99% of the UK is not developed, i.e. doesn't have tarmac or concrete on it or bricks. So, in theory, there's a lot of physical space in the world
for that to be.
But exactly what it is you want to turn into big forests and where you want to plant these things is a whole other question. As a very, and I can't stress enough how rough, but very rough estimate, Labour's plan is about 5% of the country being covered in trees.